Most people assume the United States dollar became the world's currency because America was simply the richest country on earth. That explanation feels neat, logical, almost comforting. But it's wrong, or at least wildly incomplete. If wealth alone decided global money, then history would look very different. Spain once ruled oceans of silver. Britain commanded an empire where the sun never set. China dominated global trade for centuries, yet none of their currencies ended up embedded in the daily transactions of nearly every country on Earth. So why did the dollar win? Why does oil trade in dollars? Debt settle in dollars? Crises rush toward dollars, and enemies of the United States still hoard dollars when panic hits. The real story is not about strength alone. It's about fear, timing, broken systems, and a sequence of choices that lock the world into a financial arrangement it can't easily escape. And the most unsettling part is this: the system that elevated the dollar may now be quietly unraveling beneath it. To understand how the dollar conquered the world, we have to rewind to a time when global money didn't belong to any single nation. For most of human history, money was physical and painfully real. Gold and silver moved slowly across borders, dragged by ships and caravans, vulnerable to storms, pirates, and war. Empires rose and fell on their ability to control these metals. Spain flooded Europe with silver from the Americas, triggering inflation centuries before the word even existed. Britain later built a financial system around gold, discipline, and trust, turning London into the beating heart of global finance. By the late 19th century, the gold standard reigned supreme. Currencies were promises, but gold was the anchor. If you trusted a country's gold reserves, you trusted its money. The United States entered this world late and uncertain. It was rich in land and ambition, but poor in credibility. For decades, the dollar was not special. It competed, stumbled, inflated, and fractured during Civil War. Even as America industrialized, global finance still revolved around London. British pounds settled trade. British banks financed shipping. British institutions enforced rules. The United States was rising, but it was not yet trusted. Trust, in global finance, is everything, and trust takes disasters to transfer. That disaster arrived in the early 20th century, wrapped in uniforms and artillery. The First World War shattered the old order. European powers didn't just fight, they borrowed themselves into exhaustion. Gold drained from London and Paris toward New York as countries paid for weapons, food, and survival. The United States didn't enter the war immediately, but its balance sheets already felt the impact. By the time the fighting ended, Europe was physically destroyed and financially broken. The United States, by contrast, emerged as the world's largest creditor, holding massive gold reserves and an economy untouched by battlefield ruin. For the first time, the world had to look west for stability. But even then, the dollar did not automatically become king. After the war, leaders tried to stitch the old system back together. They returned to gold, believing discipline would restore confidence. Instead, it strangled economies. Deflation crushed wages. Debt became unbearable. When the Great Depression hit, the illusion collapsed entirely. Banks failed. Trade froze. Countries abandoned gold one by one. Trust evaporated. Money itself became suspect. This was the moment the dollar almost lost everything, or quietly positioned itself to gain it all. In the depths of the Depression, the United States did something radical. It broke with gold domestically, devalued the dollar, and centralized control under the federal government. This move was controversial, even terrifying, but it gave policymakers flexibility that gold-bound nations lacked. When the Second World War erupted, the consequences of these choices became clear. Once again, Europe burned. Once again, the United States supplied the weapons, food, and industrial output needed to survive. But this time, America planned ahead. As the war neared its end, officials understood that returning to the old system would invite another collapse. So they designed a new one, not in secret, but with astonishing confidence. In a quiet town in New Hampshire, Delegates from dozens of countries gathered to redesign global finance from scratch. The agreement they forged was elegant and deeply asymmetric. The dollar would be pegged to gold. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar. In theory, this preserved gold discipline. In reality, it made the United States the center of the system. Countries could hold dollars instead of gold. Trade could settle in dollars. Reserves could accumulate without ships and vaults. It was efficient. It was stable. And it depended entirely on faith in the United States. For decades, it worked. The world rebuilt. Trade exploded. American factories powered global growth. The dollar flowed outward, financing reconstruction and development. But beneath the surface, a tension grew. To supply the world with dollars, the United States had to run deficits. To maintain confidence, it had to limit them. This contradiction was mathematical, unavoidable, and eventually fatal. By the late 1960s, foreign governments held more dollars than the United States could redeem in gold. The promise at the heart of the system became impossible to keep. When France demanded gold for its dollars, the illusion cracked. In a single weekend decision, the United States closed the gold window. The dollar was no longer backed by metal. The world gasped. Many expected the system to collapse overnight. It didn't. Instead, something stranger happened. The dollar survived and even strengthened without gold. Why? Because by then, the world had reorganized itself around the dollar so completely that abandoning it felt more dangerous than trusting it. Oil trade shifted into dollars. Global debt contracts were written in dollars. Financial markets deepened around American institutions. Even countries that resented American power depended on its currency to function. Every crisis reinforced this dependence. When markets panicked, investors didn't flee the dollar, they ran toward it. During inflation shocks, debt crises, and geopolitical chaos, the dollar became the world's emergency shelter. This created a feedback loop. The more the dollar was used, the more indispensable it became. The more indispensable it became, the harder it was to replace. But no system survives without stress fractures. Over time, the privileges of issuing the world's currency turned into temptations. Debt grew. Deficits expanded. Financialization hollowed out productive capacity. The same mechanism that allowed the United States to fund wars, welfare, and consumption also encouraged complacency. Meanwhile, other nations watched, learned, and quietly prepared alternatives. Today, the mystery returns with urgency. Can a currency remain dominant forever without discipline? Can trust survive endless money creation? Can rivals build parallel systems without triggering collapse? History suggests no monetary order is permanent. They endure until they don't, and the moment of change is rarely announced in advance. The dollar did not become the world's currency because it was destined to. It won because others failed, because war reshaped trust, because systems broke faster than replacements could form. Its dominance is not a law of nature. It is an outcome of fear, coordination, and momentum. The first takeaway is this: global money follows stability, not morality. The world uses the dollar, not because it loves the United States, but because the alternatives feel riskier. The second takeaway is that financial power is path-dependent. Once systems lock in, escaping them becomes extraordinarily costly, even when flaws are obvious. And the third takeaway is the most uncomfortable dominance breeds fragility. The very success of the dollar has allowed imbalances to grow that would destroy any other currency. The open question is not whether the dollar will last forever. It is how the transition happens when confidence finally fractures, slowly, quietly, or all at once. And history warns us that monetary endings are never gentle. If you want to understand the forces shaping the next global shift, not through headlines, but through the deep mechanics of money and power, then stay here. Like the video, subscribe, and remember, currencies don't fall when people hate them. They fall when people stop believing there is no alternative.